computer could quit freezing, that'd be lovely. All right. Today we have Rod Fleming with us. We're going to talk about the history of transgenderism. He has a website called rodfleming.com and is the author of, what was the name of that book again?
The Warm Pink Jelly Express.
We're going to talk about the sorry, say that again.
The Warm Pink Jelly Express Train, which is about transsexual women. It's a fiction book, but it will be of interest to anyone who is interested in this subject.
Okay.
But go ahead. Go on. Let's talk about the history.
I guess let's start from there. Like, what do we know about it? What kind of differences in different individuals, I guess, would be the way.
Well, no, how can we put this? The phenomenon of people being born one sex but wishing to appear as the other, right, has been known for millennia, literally thousands of years. It's mentioned in the Vedas, the Hindu Veda texts, which were written between 1500 and 3000 BCE. It's mentioned in a group of texts called the Hymns to Inanna, which were written in Mesopotamia or prior to 3000 BCE. We only have fragments of those. The Hindu texts are much more complete. Then it was mentioned by the Greeks, the Romans. It was known in Egypt. We don't know too many details because it was a long time ago, but we do know that it's been around for a very long time. In the modern milieu, the first mentions of it appear over 100 years ago. Magnus Hirschfeld, very famous German sexologist, who's normally thought of as the father of modern sexology, he described it in his book, Die Transvestiten. I can't really speak German, and that was published around about 1900. And researchers from that point onwards, people like Havelock Ellis and then through to Kurt Freund and Ray Blanchard, continue to try to explain what was actually going on. What there are in male to feminine transsexualism, that is, people born male who wish to appear to be women. There are two completely distinct forms that we find, and this was categorized and described very comprehensively by Ray Blanchard in a series of papers which are available from my site. So I'll try not to fall off the edge of the screen here. The first type is what you might expect. These share many characteristics with feminine gay men. Okay, so they tend to be kind of small, kind of neotenous in their faces. They're very, very strongly attracted to men from childhood exclusively. They have no interest in women at all, romantically. And that's what everybody expected to see, but form in the West. Can you see me still?
You
I'll keep going.
A bit. There you go.
Which attraction for men? So the two types were divided, predictably enough, into a homosexual, that's the ones attracted to men, and non-homosexual, the ones who are not attracted particularly to men. And Blanchard then devised a theory which basically, a lot of people try and get confused about this, but it lumps all the non-homosexual types together and says they have, how can you put this, we might say a burning desire, an internal love of themselves as women. So they have this real desire to be and to be accepted as women. Now, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but in broad terms, that's what you're looking at. So the former type would be exemplarized by someone like Blair White, for example, or Janet Mock, there's another good example. And the second type would be someone like Riley Dennis, or the young one, or Caitlyn Jenner for an older one. And in the West, the second type have historically normally transitioned in middle age or above. You know, the median for Blanchard's sample was 43, I believe. Here in Asia, they tend to transition much younger, but that's to do with social conditions. You know, it's just a different milieu. Appearing to be feminine if you're male in the West has historically been something that would get you in a lot of trouble. You know.
Yeah.
I certainly remember at school kids getting beaten up for being too sissy. You know, yeah. It's not ever affected me. I mean, look at the size of me, but and that really tended to make people suppress it. You know, Whereas in Asia, if you are observed being keen on wearing girly clothes, they'll just say, look, you're obviously one of them, so just get on with it. It's a slightly different approach, you know. It's just as okay, but it's actually more collectivist here in Asia, but there is a social space that exists for trans people, which really doesn't, or at least hasn't, in the West. So they're everywhere. I mean, you can't walk down the street here. I live in a place called Angeles in the Philippines, and you cannot walk down the street, but you'll meet and see many trans women.
Okay.
And trans men also, you know, the lesbians who appear to be men. I mean, they've got male haircuts, they wear male clothes, they look like very cute guys, you know, and you'll see them everywhere. It's just not a remarkable part of life at all.
Okay, so how common is transgenderism among humans?
Ooh, this is a really good question. Now, there's been a number of surveys done. One recent one suggested by the Williams Institute, actually, the Williams Institute of the University of California, recently, I think 3 years ago now, did a study which suggested that around about 1 million in the United States, which is about 1/3%, I think that'll work out, you know, just under 0.5%.
Okay.
They based that on the number of people who had applied for changes in their legal gender, you know, the legal gender status, things like driving licenses and that sort of thing.
Okay.
So they from that they extrapolated this number around about 1 million. In Asia, looking around me, well, some estimates, which I think are quite reliable, of the situation in Thailand suggest about 1%.
1%.
Of 1% of the population, and I would say that, yeah, it's not going to be any less than that. It's that way. It's a lot. It's a lot, and that's in addition to all the more regular expressions of gay men, because there are plenty of gay men around here, you know.
Fair enough.
So yeah, I think that it kind of depends where you are. If you're in the places where there's a lot of young people, you'll tend to see more of them. But yeah, about 1%. And I think that, to be fair to the people in the West, you know, you have to remember that the West has been a bit like a pressure cooker. You know, there's been this kind of like, you will not do this, and so what I call social tolerance becomes more flexible, people become more accepting of trans people, then you should expect to see more. I mean, it just is going to happen.
Well, yeah, like, that makes sense. If there's not a whole pressure of like, no, you can't be that. Once that goes away, then the people who are hiding it more are not going to.
Yeah, in clinical terms, classic transsexualism, now there's something else called rapid onset gender dysphoria, but we're not really talking about that now, we're talking about the classic forms. It's caused by a thing called gender dysphoria, and that basically means a dissatisfaction or discomfort with appearing in the gender that your birth sex would normally lead you to appear in. You know, so I mean, you're obviously male. You look like a guy. That's fine. I'm male. I look like a guy. We feel comfy in that.
Yeah.
But imagine if you were told you're going to have to wear a big long wig and makeup and a dress and some high heels, and then go and do the usual things that you do in life. You would probably feel just a little bit uncomfortable, at least the first few times.
How pretty the dress is.
So gender dysphoria is kind of like that, but very intense and all the time. You know, so it's like, for these people, it's really like, you know, like they just can't live like that. So,
okay, and do we know any causes of it, or?
Oh, well, as I say, Blanchard's typology, which is really scientifically speaking the only game in town, suggests that there are two types. One type is caused by an intense form of male homosexuality. You know, they are very feminine in their appearance anyway.
Yeah,
and they have a female sexuality. Blanchard says they desire men's bodies just in the same way as a woman does. You know, they're directly attracted to masculinity, and that is the factor that makes them feel very uncomfortable being men. The other type, the non-homosexual type, well, it's this idea of being in love with themselves as women that causes them to not want to appear to be women. You know.
Yeah.
Because those are straight guys. Those are straight guys. They're guys who are attracted to women, right? So if they start to love themselves, they can't love themselves as a man because they're straight. So they love themselves as a woman. And so what happens is that basically they create an alter ego, often without realizing they're doing this, which is the character that they kind of are in love with, and that can take over. And it becomes like a proxy. And all their contact with people, is through this proxy. And if the proxy takes over and becomes the dominant personality in this person's head, then it can mean that they will just have to change, because that personality believes it's a woman. It was created as a woman.
Yeah.
And if it becomes strong enough to actually drive the car, it needs to be seen as a woman. And so at that point, that's when the transition will happen in those ones. HSTS, that's the homosexual transsexuals, they almost never transition above the age of 23. Because if they leave it longer than that, they'll look too masculine. And they know it ain't going to work. For an HSTS, it's all about social. It's all about, being accepted by other people as women and meeting men and finding their life partner that they want to find who's attracted to them, because they want straight men. They don't straight guy, right? And they know perfectly well that if they appear to be men, they're going to, no way, it's not going to happen. The non-homosexual type is really a lot more complicated, and it kind of makes them quite difficult people to deal with, because their condition is complex. It's not straightforward. And many of them refuse to accept that it applies to them. But then if you actually look at the parameters that are set out as, diagnostic criteria, you could go, yeah, look, you can strike through the list and say, look, you do this, you do that, you do that, you do that. You obviously conform to this profile. But the thing is that because the person you're talking to is actually a second created personality, that personality does not recognize that it was once a man. They go, oh, I was always a woman. And from that personality's point of view, that is true, because that's what they were created as.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? I find it really fascinating, because when you get to know a few people like that, and one of the delights of Asia is that there are so many, that it's easy to meet people like that here. It's not easy in the West. You want to meet some transsexuals, I should think, certainly I can tell you in the UK until quite recently, it was not going to be very easy to do. I should imagine it's the same in the States. It's not that particularly that easy to meet transsexual people. And the ones that you will meet will tend to those who are, publicly active. They're quite demonstrative activist people. Whereas here, because there are so many, you can just meet ordinary people who will sit and have a coffee with you. Yeah, they'll sit and have a coffee with you and talk to you about it, and you can get a little bit of a feel for what's going on in their minds. And HSTS, the homosexual transsexuals, it's very easy to know what they're thinking about.
Yeah.
And this is primetime TV. We're not going to go into too many details there, but they're very motivated people. Let's put it that way.
You would have to be to make that kind of a change, I would think.
Well, that's right. I mean, you're talking about something that really, and even in a culture like this one, where that's largely accepted. I've spent time in real traditional Filipino villages, or up country, out of the cities.
Yeah.
I've spent, long periods of time living in places like that. And so I've watched what happens inside the communities where the people are growing up there, Yeah. And what you'll see is that it's what's called a two-group society. You have men, basically, and you have everyone else. So the society is actually a matriarchy. It's based around the women, the grandmothers. They run the show at home, and the men just go out and work. They've got nothing to do with the day-to-day running of home and family and things like that. I mean, they hardly even appear. Within that situation, you'll have a group of young males who, for some reason or another, don't fit into the sort of proto-men group. That they don't like playing basketball. They don't like playing rough and tumble. They don't like talking about girls and chasing girls. That sort of thing that, you're a guy, you know what it's like. When you're at school, when you're behind the bike shed, and that's what you're talking about. Well, these boys don't like doing that. They prefer to play with the girls, and they have crushes on men, right? When they're talking about what their fantasies are to be with men. And they find themselves they're not thrown out of society, but there's a social space for them.
Okay.
They hang out with the girls, They play volleyball rather than basketball. That's a real tell. They dress in, the young boys here, upcountry and around the place, they'll wear like a basketball top, a big baggy basketball top and big baggy shorts. I mean, it's a hot place, so you don't wear too many clothes. And they'll wear real short hair, they look very masculine, even as boys. The other group, the not men group, which there's a name for them, they're called Beckies, which basically means everybody who's gender non-conforming. They'll wear, really, really tight shorts. I mean, the kind of thing your mother would go, you can't go out like that. You know what I mean? and tight t-shirt tops, and they'll wear their hair, even though their hair's quite short, they'll wear a little, these little elastic things in it, to make it look more girly.
Yeah. And
they will wear their hair as long as their situation, like school and stuff like that, will let them, because this is quite a strict place. Most people here, they go to school in uniform, so it's still got that kind of, well, it's that kind of social conservatism. You couldn't just walk to school in a dress. If you were a boy, you'd get sent straight home again.
Okay,
but there's lots of little things that they do, and of course the mannerisms which are off the wall, I mean, you know what you're dealing with straight away.
What would those mannerisms be? Like, how would you describe them?
You can see them practicing. I was in a village area just a couple of weeks ago, just very close to here, actually. Well, this is a city. This is where I live. This is a modern city, or a suburb in a modern city. But quite close, there's a very typical, traditional Filipino village, and my girlfriend formerly lived there, so she has friends there. We often go there, and I was watching just the other week. I was watching a group of children, and I guess they would be, probably over average age about 7 or 8. The youngest being about 6, the eldest about 10. Mainly girls, 2 boys in amongst them, and the boys were obviously practicing their girl moves. I mean, they were hip and swinging their hips around and
trying to get the walk in and.
It's like that. It's very, very camp, but you can see what they're doing. What they're actually doing is that they're perfecting their moves. It's like you can see it. It's obvious, and they're not interested in playing because there's other boys, playing football or basketball just up the road. And these boys are not interested in doing that. They want to hang around with the girls and be girly. So I'm talking here about children, and this is a place where it's not like the situation that's happening in the West now, which is actually, I think, very worrying, where young people are kind of being groomed by older trans activists. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of this situation.
Yeah, they've got the hormones,
talk about that.
Everything like that.
Yeah. That's just not happening here. The other adults are having nothing to do with it. The men, generally speaking, are disapproving, and they don't want their boy children doing this. But because Filipino villages are matriarchies and they're run by the women, the men can't just come in and say, right, you're not doing that anymore, because the women will say, don't take children. Looking after children is women's responsibility. It's not men's responsibility.
You go back to work and just shut your mouth.
Yeah, make some money. Well, I'll spend it for you.
Yeah.
Which is kind of that is the lot of a guy in the Philippines. They go to work, they drink with their buddies. Yeah, they chase women, of course they do, but it's a fairly traditional lifestyle. And disciplining of the children and looking after their education, things like that's women's work.
Yeah.
So the social divide is really strong here. And what it does do is it gives you this space in which people who don't conform, they're just going to be left alone. Really, that's all it is. It's just left alone. And if they, I guess some of them will, at some stage, they'll grow out of it and go, I'm not doing that anymore. Yeah. But as the evidence of walking along the street here shows you that many of them don't. They stick with it.
Fair.
And they'll turn into,
so that's
in many cases, extreme women. Well, not women, but you know what I mean, trans women.
So
in many cases, they
having that space for them to kind of just be themselves, does that actually affect their mental health outcomes? Like, because I know in the West here we have like a 40% suicide rate or something ridiculous like that. So I think I would be very careful.
with these statistics.
Okay.
I've looked at that, and I have not been able to back up this 40% suicide rate that is frequently quoted.
Okay.
I can't find any study that actually confirms that. Now, there have been some very high-profile cases where trans teenagers have taken their own lives. Leila Alcorn, I think is her name, is a very famous case. And that has, grabbed the attention of the media. But the 40%, let's just say I'm not persuaded. I've not seen evidence that is convincing on that one. I mean, how would you know? I mean, think about it. How would you know? If someone was committed suicide because they hadn't been allowed to be trans, how on earth would, somebody coming along later to find out statistics know that?
That's a fair point.
It's
kind of like
I used to be I'm basically a journalist, so I'm trained to question things like that, as well as an academic. So it's having said that, it's quite clear that if you do have severe dysphoria, it's a very strong thing. It's not a funny thing to have, and I certainly have many messages particularly from older men who have the non-homosexual variation, and they really have had miserable lives.
Yeah,
constantly suppressing it. It's very, very difficult for them. That seems to be much less the case in HSDS. With HSDS, as I say, if they don't transition by their mid-20s, they probably won't. And they just make a life as a guy,
Yeah.
And they'll probably always think, well, I would quite like to have been a girl, but hey, that's not how my particular cookie crumbled, They tend to be quite well-adjusted people wherever you meet them. Actually, they're okay. People like Blair White. I mean, Blair White is a very public example, but so is Janet Mock. I mean, they're obviously quite well-adjusted people. They have lives, they have careers. Their lives are not chaotic and not falling apart all around them.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is fairly much the case for HSDS everywhere. They're well-adjusted. They're okay. For the non-homosexual type, I think it can be very difficult for them. If they're constantly trying to suppress something that's so important to them. The problem, you're touching on this issue of people who are very young being identified as trans, and I think we're developing a real big problem in the West. I see it slightly differently because I see what's happening here in Asia.
Okay.
In Asia, it's very relaxed, and people are really allowed, certainly in the Philippines, and in Thailand, it's very relaxed, and young people are allowed to kind of find their own way, and they will find peers. There will be peers around them, but there's not going to be a psychologist or a doctor coming along and saying, well, you're trans, well, we'll get you on this, and we'll get you on blockers, and we'll do this, and we'll do that, and do the other. It's all very much the individual kind of feels their way forward, and I think people are able to get on or off the train as it suits them. I mean, a lot of the people we see here, a lot of the trans people will detransition, by the time they're sort of 35, 40, they'll just stop.
Yeah.
Because they kind of lose their looks, or they have to get a serious job, because they've got to look after a family, and a whole bunch of other reasons. They just stop. And I think, particularly for non-homosexual transsexuals, it's almost like they get it out of their system,
Okay.
And if they do that when they're young, they get to be 35, they go, oh, fine, I've had enough of that. And they just stop. And will frequently at that point get married, have children, and presumably someday entertain their grandkids about how they were once gorgeous pageant winners, which is true, that does happen. And I think on my site I've got pictures of pageant beauty queens who are now regular blokes like us, because they got jobs where they're managed positions in call centers. They're a big thing here. It's a really big part of the economy, especially for younger, more educated people. So these people who were women or appeared to be women got jobs as in BPO. It's called BPO, and then they were put into management position. And generally speaking, it's changing a bit, but generally speaking, at the shop floor level, they don't really care. If you appear to be a woman, that's fine, not a problem. But once you get into the management structure, now you've got to behave yourself and dress up as a guy, or you can't have the job. So a lot of them, it's just at that point they go, You know, I'm going to get 3 times the salary. It's okay. I'll live with it. You know, because they need the money. You know, and it's a really a very flexible situation here. There's not that kind of idea that you get in the West, which is once you trans, you're stuck with it.
Yeah.
You know? And there's something strange about detransitioning.
Yeah.
What I see from the situation here is that people are okay about that. You can explore that in yourself. If you are a guy who has these feelings for whichever reason, the possibility is there for you to go through a period of your life where you do appear to be a woman, and the same is true, obviously, in female to masculine, FTM, and they're the same, without anybody saying, "Oh, that's weird, you changed back again." You know, they won't say that. And I know people who have met, and they get a job in a hotel, and the hotel says you're going to have to cut your hair. They appear as boys. The next year you meet them, they got their hair down again. You know, they're growing their hair. They're wearing a dress. They got the bra full of socks. You know, and you say, "What happened?" I got fired.
Fair enough.
I got fired. I don't need to be a boy anymore. And so it's that kind of, you know, it's kind of, at home we call it easy ozy. You know, it's laissez-faire.
Yeah,
you can do this. You're not going to get beaten up for doing this. You know, it's not, nobody's going to come down on you like that. I am concerned, I must admit, about what's appearing to be happening in the West just now. Certainly in the UK, a place called the Portman Institute, the premier transgender clinic in the UK, the Tavistock and Portman Clinic, has reported a massive upsurge in referrals from GPs, you know, general practice doctors, who are not trained to deal with this, referring children coming forward to specialists. And the leading clinic, as I say, in the UK, I think they're something like 300 or 400% up, maybe more.
Wow,
there's definitely something happening now, and two of the leading researchers, Ray Blanchard and Mike Bailey, both professors, they have been writing articles, and you'll find their articles on the Fourth Wave Now, which is a feminist site, but it's one of the better feminist sites, Fourth Wave Now site, and they have written articles about this thing that's called rapid onset gender dysphoria, which appears to mainly affect girls.
Okay.
And what will happen is, you know, in the classic forms of gender dysphoria, particularly homosexual gender dysphoria, you'll know there's something going on because your kid will have been, if he's a boy, he'll have been dressing up as a girl since he was 5, or something, you know, wearing a t-shirt on his head or a towel, you know, so it looks like long hair, and walking around practicing his moves in the house when he doesn't think you're looking, borrowing his mum's shoes, that sort of thing, you know. And you'll have remarked, you'll have gone, there's something interesting, and you won't really be surprised. You'll probably think he's a gay boy, and he might be a gay boy, but you won't be if he goes, well, you know, I think I'm going to complete this transition and be a girl. I don't think anybody in that situation is going to be surprised.
Yeah.
This new form, it seems to happen just like that. It's a real shock to the parents and the people around them. It's like the child comes home or goes to her mother, it's usually a girl now, and says, I think I'm trans.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no apparent reason for it. You know, there's no history. Even the non-homosexual form of MTF, it always has history, you know. There's always something going on that you can go back to. And I think a lot of people, including the researchers Blanchard and Bailey and many others, including myself, think that this new form is really not sexually motivated. It's not about who you are in terms of your sexual relationship to yourself. I'm not talking about, you know, physical sex, I mean, in your head, you know, or your desire for other people, or your desire for anything else at all. It's to do with the social situation you find yourself in. And I find it very striking that this rapid uptick in what's being called rapid onset gender dysphoria is absolutely coincident with the arrival of smartphones and social media. And I'm saying, I don't think that's a coincidence.
No, why don't you think that's a coincidence? That is a very, incredibly interesting fact to me. So what do you think the correlation between the two is?
Well, I think that if you spend some time on sites like Tumblr, for example, you'll find, and there's many others, you know, you'll find that there are groups there where there's real pressure, you know, and when you read some of the threads, You know, people coming on saying, I feel a little bit such and such, and people going immediately, you're trans. You know, so there's a kind of a peer pressure to be trans. And then there's also this thing called, you may not have heard of this, there is a concept called true scum. True scum in these groups are the conventional trans people, because within this little milieu we're talking about, they don't believe that gender dysphoria is required to make you trans. They think your gender is a choice. It's just a political choice that you make, a life choice. And that you can be any gender that you want. And people who argue that, no, you actually do need to have some sort of underlying motivation, they call people like me and those trans people who are like that, they call us true scum, because we say that their position, that you can just be what you like, and there doesn't need to be an underlying motivation, is wrong. Now, I don't have a problem. I mean, I'm a libertarian, so you know, if you're 18 or above, you can do whatever you like. I'm not going to argue with you. It's not my issue. I don't get to call for your life.
Yeah.
But we're seeing situations where girls, particularly, are doing things like binding the breasts, having double mastectomies, taking testosterone, and this is happening under the age of 16 now, particularly in the United States.
That's way too young.
Well, absolutely. I would say that it's completely too young. And I think it's going to cause an awful lot of problems. And we're seeing an increase in what's called desistance. That's where people say, no, I'm not trans. They detransition.
Yeah.
And they're detransitioning not at the sort of onset of middle age as they would in Asia, but 22, 23, when they actually become adult and realize what they are.
Yeah.
You know? They go, wait, I mean, and the number of people that I've spoken to that on Twitter and various other areas who will say, let me just get the light back, who will say that they're born girls, they transed, they had surgeries, and then realized that they were just lesbians, you know? And they went through all this surgery and all this change of their body, really for no good reason at all. Now that, to me, and I have 4 kids, and you have kids, that worries me. That really worries me. It worries me that there are adults who are actually actively promoting this. You know, they're going out into schools and saying that anybody who shows any gender non-conformity must be trans and must be assisted in transitioning. And that's just bull. It's just bull. You know, all children experiment with role play.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely not uncommon for a boy to put on a dress and try on the makeup, you know. It's all a big laugh. It's just about them discovering who they are, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, they're finding their boundaries. Like, no, that's not really me, but I've tried it, you know. Because kids are like plasticine when they're small, you know that. And it's just like they kind of mold themselves. And you just let them do it. You just go, yeah, you look great, you know, and ignore it. And then in the vast majority of cases, a month later, that's, no, I don't want to be Wendy anymore. I want to be Peter Pan. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and like what's especially scary about that is like in Canada here, we have in Ontario, at least, I don't know about the rest of Canada. I'm still looking into it. We have this law called M10 something. I can't.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
I'd have to talk to Dr. Amate again about that.
Yeah.
But where it's like it's illegal to not help the transition if your young child says that, like, it's actually illegal. Child services will accuse you of, you know, being abusive and take your child away unless you actually follow through with it. And like,
I think I honestly think that's a scandal, and I think that it has been brought about by trans activists latching on to the broader left, politically speaking.
Yeah.
And swinging the left's agenda to utilizing the political power of the left to get their own agenda to go forward.
Yeah.
You have to admit that the people who are behind this tend to be older, non-homosexual transsexuals, MTF, male to feminine, the ones we normally call autogynephilic, Blanchard autogynephiles. Remember, these people are people who are walking around with a created second personality that thinks it's a woman in their heads, right? Who are running their plot. Yeah. And they're desperate. They're absolutely desperate for validation. Right. Now, one of the things we know is that this form of transsexualism, it doesn't appear before puberty. It appears at or after puberty. In the APA DSM-5, it's described as late onset dysphoria, but when they say late, they mean after puberty, and early onset is before puberty. That's their distinction, but it's the same one, you know.
Yeah.
Now, what's happening is these people, and I managed to interact with them quite a lot, in the West particularly, they have a second created personality, okay? Now, that created personality has to have a history. It had to come from somewhere. It had to have a childhood. You know, once it takes over, it has to have a childhood. But it has to have a childhood that conforms to its understood identity as a female, as a woman. So it invents things, right? It looks back into its past and says, "Oh, do you remember when I was 6? I used to like to wear my hair long," and something like that. If you ask their parents, if you speak to the people around them at the time, they'll say, "No, they were perfectly normal boys." Now, this is complete contrast to the homosexual variant. Homosexual variants really will be like that, you know.
Yeah.
You will know that they're going to do something.
This is
the non-homosexual ones, nobody will know. People will be completely surprised, like the people around Jenner were when she came out and said, "I'm a girl." I mean, her best friend said, "I'm amazed. I never knew," you know.
Yeah.
That's typical. But what they then do is they invent this past where they were being like this, and this is their justification for themselves. And that's what they're doing when they start to interfere in the lives of young people. They're saying, look at all these young people who are like I just was. You know, they were just like I was when I was a kid, but they weren't like that. They weren't really like that. It's in their head.
Yeah.
So they're actually using young people to validate their own existence, and as you know, trans women, or they think they're real women. And to me, that's a terrible thing to do in the first place.
Yeah.
You know, because it's not honest. It's just not honest. They weren't like that. The children they're talking to, you know, children who show strong gender nonconformity, this GNC thing, and who persist. Now, lots of boys will wear a dress, and you know they'll do it, and it goes away. You know, it's not a problem. They don't do it a couple of weeks and then move on to another character. There's a group who will show gender nonconformity persistently and strongly, and if they're showing it for maybe 6 months or a year or more, and they're showing perhaps real distress about being called by their boy name, or having to go to school dressed as a boy, and this goes on for a long time, you know, and there's no relief. And there's no apparent cause. I mean, like I say, if you've got a kid who's really into Peter Pan, well, he probably will want to play Wendy sometime just to find out, you know, he's just exploring the social interaction between these two characters. That's all he's doing.
Yeah.
If it's really gender dysphoric and it's deeper than that, it's going to continue, it's going to get worse. It's going to be
not you.
Of those people who really are persistent, depends on the study you look at, but 60 to 80% will turn out into regular gay males or females, right? They'll be homosexual, and they'll appear conforming to their sex. They'll be gender conforming, right? Between 10 and 30% are actually transsexual, and there ain't nothing you can do about it. They're going to be that way.
Yeah.
The older non-homosexual type kind of focus on those children and say, well, that was what I was like. But actually, when you look at their own real histories, no, they were not like that.
No.
It's the transsexuals who were like that. The Blair Whites, they were like that.
Yeah.
The Caitlyn Jenners, no, they weren't like that. So there's something really, to me, it's very corrupt, this idea that you could, because you as an adult have developed this second personality and you've developed this idea of yourself as a woman, that you can then, in a way, it's almost like preying on children, you know, to validate yourself. And to me, I think it's horrifying.
Yeah, that's appalling.
Well, I think so. I think it's really appalling. And I think that the way that they have, they are pushing laws so that parents can't exercise proper parental judgment in the upbringing of their children. I think that's terrible. And I think that I think it might be called C-19. I can't remember the name. The law that you're talking about.
No, there's actually two different laws. So C-16, the one that you're just discussing, that has to do with putting transgender and gender. Oh, what are they? Like gender identity and stuff. Basically, the idea is behind like if you misgender somebody, you can be
in trouble.
you're in trouble. You can be taken in front of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, which is $25,000 to $50,000 to set up, which is on you to pay for. And then you got the cost of lawyers, and you're pretty much at their mercy. And if you say, no, I'm not going to stop, like if, you know, say you're a Catholic and you're like, no, I'm not going to call them that man and girl, and the court orders you and you refuse, you end up going to jail for contempt of court. So it's compelled speech, right? And then the I can't remember. I think it like M106, I think is what it is, but I could be wrong. I'll have to look back into my last interview with Dr. Amte. Yeah, like it's actually illegal to not support your child in transition. Now, I'm not against transgenders. My sister's trans. I really don't have an issue with it, but I do have an issue when it's like, for starters, you're talking about the male, like the homosexual trans. Is it transsexual? Just want to make sure.
No, the term is homosexual transsexual, HSTS for short.
Okay, so if most of them are like end up just being gay men, anyways, then yeah, like it's gonna be it seems unjust to put them through unnecessary surgery that they're too young to a informed decision about. And then
absolutely,
and then it being illegal.
I couldn't agree more.
Right, so I mean I
think it seems to me to be an egregious intrusion by the state on the rights of parents to decide for themselves and to look after their children and to be responsible for the future of children. I think it's really appalling.
Oh yeah,
and I don't think that any child under the age of 16 should be getting any hormones or surgery or anything. The fact is, well, I know, and it's really bad. The thing is that homosexual transsexuals, who are the ones who are, you know, when we're talking about men, male to feminine, particularly, HSTS, they tend to pass, right? They make very attractive women. I mean, most people would look at someone like Janet Mock and say, you know, she's a really attractive woman and she's going to pass as a woman. And they say the same about Blair White. And you know, I know so many, and many in the West, they do a thing called woodworking. They just live as women and nobody knows about their past. You know? So I kind of lost my thread there, but these people they're going to survive well, you know, but they tend to be very feminine already. You know, they tend to be slightly built, very neotenous, that's baby-faced. Their mannerisms, everything about them and their sexuality, it's all very feminized without the help of hormones. Yeah. So the hormones, it's kind of like the polish on the top. It kind of finishes it off, you know?
Yeah.
And they will often go for, you know, some cosmetic surgery, which actually usually isn't necessary, but here you go. That's my opinion. So they really don't need the hormones early on. And if you speak to people, well, Blair White's a good example because she's public, but there's many others. She'll publicly say, you know, I don't think it's a good idea for these kids, for young people to get hormones, because she started hormones later and it's fine. It's worked really well for her.
Yeah.
For young non-homosexual transsexuals, they tend to be, because there's a cluster of body types, you know, HSTS, they all tend to be very similar looking. They all tend to look like girls, I'm afraid.
Which is convenient.
The non-homosexual type just look like the general population of men around them. There's big ones, short ones, fat ones, muscular ones, you name it, you know. Yeah. And for some of them, it's a real effort to be feminized. I mean, if you were Caitlyn Jenner, I mean, look, you're a pretty big guy, you know, and you're fairly masculine looking. Imagine how difficult it would be at your stage in life. I guess you're in your mid-30s, which is a very classic point.
Not close, but okay.
But that's a real classic time for a non-homosexual transsexual to transition.
Okay.
You know, it's going to be a bit of an effort, you know. You're going to have to take a lot of hormones and you're going to need a lot of surgeries and da-da-dee-da. So, yeah, I could see that for someone like that, then if they do understand that they are trans and that's the path they're going on, in early life, then there maybe is a case. But for HSTS, no, I don't see it. And in any case, I think that the most you can do that's reasonable is to use blockers for a short period of time, just to give a breathing space.
Yeah.
For everybody to figure out what's going on, All right. The parents, the child, everybody just have think about what's going on, and that's what Dr. Ray Blanchard, that's his position, and I totally agree with him.
Yeah.
The object should be not to push forward the transition, but to give everybody time to think about it.
Yeah.
If that does mean that you've got a child who's rapidly masculinizing, which an HSTS normally won't, yeah, okay, maybe we should think about that in that case, blockers.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to get hell for this, but for female to masculine, well, no, because the effect of testosterone, testosterone is like a one-way road, You apply testosterone and the person becomes masculine.
Yeah.
If you don't apply testosterone, the person remains feminine looking.
Yeah.
Right? So for female to masculine, they can wait. Because all that's going to happen, unless you apply testosterone when they're really, really young, before their skeletons have formed, then they're going to develop female skeletons anyway, and they're always, they're going to have slight shoulders, big hips, then they're going to be petite. And I just don't think that it's justifiable under any circumstances to be giving children of 12, 13, 14, 15, testosterone. Girl children, that is, female children. I think that's wrong. And the reason I think it's wrong is that whereas estrogen causes quite strong physical changes in males, it doesn't actually sterilize them. Okay? Normally, certainly I can assure you that there's plenty of trans women who have fathered children in the East, believe me, in Asia. So they can tend to continue to have that possibility in their lives, that they can have a family. Testosterone will burn out a girl's ovaries. It will kill them dead very shortly, very quickly. So what you're basically saying to a child of the age of 14 or 15 is you're going to make her sterile.
Yeah.
And I think that's wholly irresponsible. I can't believe that any thinking would do that. I'm horrified by that notion.
Now, if you were to add testosterone later on in life, does it produce some more masculine traits, or?
If you take your testosterone later, it will still sterilize you. But if you're doing it above the age of 18, my view is that's your decision. You're in a position to make what's called informed consent. You can read the literature, you can investigate for yourself, and you can make your own decision on that basis. I don't believe, speaking as a parent, that people of 14, 15, or 16 are intellectually mature enough to make decisions like that.
Oh, man. When I was 14, 15, 16, I was an idiot. I still kind of am. But back then, wow.
But yeah, exactly. And, if you were to be told, well, you're going to have to make a decision today that will really change the whole of your life, at the age of 14, it's a terrible responsibility to put on a child,
Absolutely.
It's not fair. It's not fair to do that.
Yeah.
To encourage girls, and this ROGD, which has not been researched properly, and we are very vague on it still, this ROGD, which appears to affect mainly young women, that's exactly what it's doing. And what the activists who are pushing for it to be ROGD to be rapidly treated as well, that's what they're pushing for. It's for them to be sterilized and to lose any chance of ever having children or a family.
Yeah.
At the age of 14, and I simply can't find it in myself. And I am a supporter of trans people. My girlfriend lying next door sleeping because it's far too early for her to get up is trans. Why would I be against trans people? I'm not. I'm completely supportive of them. But I am also a parent, and I am concerned that, and I have a daughter, who's fine, but I would be really worried. And I'm worried for other parents who are put in this position, especially if you've got the mechanism of the state coming in and saying, well, we're just going to take over from you. Yeah. We're going to put you in jail and we're going to take your kids from you. Now, I'm a journalist, and I have seen what happens when the state starts doing things like that. And I would suggest that you and your viewers Google's, I think they try this a term, something like social work scandal, Orkneys, 1989. And that was where some social workers decided that, really on no evidence, that some of the parents, some middle-class parents in the Orkney Islands, which are to the north of Scotland, were in fact a satanic ring who were satanically abusing their children. And all the children were taken away in a terrible trauma. Lives were ruined. Children were taken into care for years. And eventually, they went through the courts and a judge completely threw it out. He said this is the most appalling piece of nonsense he'd ever come across. And he described the professionals who'd been involved in it as incompetent.
Okay.
And, you know, it was talking about a high court judge here. We're talking about people who do not normally make such strong statements. Now, I was a senior journalist working in Scotland at the time, and I followed this case intimately. And I was horrified by what happens when you give people like that the power to just enter ordinary people's homes. I mean, there was no abuse. There was nothing. It was nothing. It was all just imagination. When you give people who are not well trained, and I'm afraid that will be the case with a lot of the child services professionals, not well trained, who are taught to believe everything of this kind of extreme left agenda that, you know, there's
that is just jumping out everywhere.
Parents who don't trans their children, they're bad parents, you know, and all that sort of stuff. When they get involved and they start interfering with families, the result is ruin. It's a disaster. I mean, these people never, ever in Orkney, and as far as I know, the last time I looked about 5 years ago. Oh, they're still, the media leaves them alone now, obviously, because of respect. But years after that, children were saying that they had been totally traumatized. And they never got a response. They never got an apology. Not one.
You kidding?
No apology, no reparations, no bugger all. No nothing. And it was just shocking. But what was really shocking for me was to watch the power that these people have, because it was only afterwards, you know, after the time it takes for something to go through court and all that, that the legal system stopped it and said, no, like, these children are going home. It wasn't the only case. There was another one in Ayrshire. These children are going home. Nothing has happened to them. And for years after, that's what they were saying. And of course, at the point that these children are so young, they're confused and they'll say anything. You know?
Yeah.
You know, I really do think, I don't want to get too rambling here, but I really do think that social media is a big problem. I think what's happening is that young people, particularly young girls, because girls are, it's one of those trait characteristic differences, girls are more socially affected than men are. Yeah. Girls are more affected by peer pressure than men are. Men tend to be more individualistic. Women tend to be more collectivist, you know? So yeah. There is pressure to conform amongst women. And they're going onto social sites where transition is being talked about and pushed. It's literally being pushed. And they're coming under the influence of this. And I have to say that if one of my children, if my daughter, she's my daughter, my kids are all in their 20s, you know, so we're not going to discuss that. But if I was in that position and knowing what I know now, and my daughter came to me and said, I think I'm trans, I would say, give me your mobile phone now.
Yeah.
I would simply cut off access to all social media, because I think that's where the problem is. I still can't, I can't get away from this correlation between the arrival of the mobile phone, the arrival of social media, and the uptick in rapid onset gender dysphoria. I can't see how these are not related. Because I can't see any other difference, Kyle. I mean, has sexuality changed so quickly in this period of time?
I think so, because you said it came about right about when the smartphones came. Birth control was long before then, so...
Yeah, it's not down to underlying change in human sexuality. So it must be something more superficial. And the only one I can think of
would be the smartphones.
Well, and social media. It's not so much the technical device, it's what's going on them, you know?
Okay. Now, I have noticed that you've more consistently referred to trans people in the male to female kind of category. Mainly, is there a bigger number of men transitioning than women, or is
talking about the classical forms? you know, the ones that we understand, the ones that were around until, you know, 2000, say, the ones that are sexually motivated, there are significantly more male to feminine. I don't say male to female because you can't actually say change your sex, change your appearance. You know? There are significantly more male to feminine than there were female to masculine. Significantly more. There haven't been that many studies, but the studies that there are suggest that it's something around 1 to 3 or 1 to 4. You know, so there are 3 or 4 times as many MTF as FTM, which again makes the rapid onset form very interesting because it almost exclusively affects young girls.
And
so people should be going, there's something funny going on here.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. I would be curious to learn more about that. That's
Well, I suspect that the reason why there are significantly more of the classical forms of MTF is that there are 2 forms of masculine to feminine. The MTF, there's the homosexual form and the non-homosexual form. And until very recently, and Ray Blanchard has said that he didn't think that non-homosexual FTM actually happened.
Okay.
But it does seem in the past, in the historical, I think in the historical data, what's happening is that because there are these 2 forms, and there are certainly, Blanchard reckons about 3 times as many non-homosexual as homosexual in the West. If you work that back to the numbers, that would account for the difference between MTF and FTM, in such that FTM in the classical forms are much fewer, because there isn't this second type. So in actual numbers of MTF and FTM, maybe they're closer when we're talking about the homosexual transsexuals. It could be, but again, the trouble here, Kyle, is not an awful lot of research.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to compare you to Dutch studies that were done in the late part of the last century, and there's very little current research. You know, I don't know if you know this, but one of the leading American sex researchers, Mike Bailey, who is a very nice man and a very serious and honest researcher, you know, is a man of great integrity. He published a book called The Man Who Would Be Queen, which basically explained Ray Blanchard's theory, the 2 types theory. And he got trashed by some non-homosexual, autogynephilic trans activists who accused him of child abuse, tried to get him fired, accused him of professional misconduct. Oh, you name it. And it was a scandal that ran on for years. Of course, it was all investigated properly by his university, Northwestern in Chicago. It was all found to be a complete fabrication. The poor man still lost his family.
Yeah.
And when things like that happen, it does kind of put researchers off. You know, if you're seeking tenure and you know that if you're going to go into an area like that, you're going to get slammed and you might well lose everything. It makes it less encouraging
on what people want to talk about.
You're kind of, I mean, I say what I like because I don't care. You know, I don't have that much to lose. I'm an older man. My kids are growing up. You know, I'm fine. But I could see an academic starting their career wanting to do some groundbreaking research. They're going to go, I'm not going near that.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to stay away from that one because that's going to really hot water, you know.
That's kind of the problem, is you ask any questions and you're immediately labeled as a transphobe or something like that.
Absolutely. If you ever say, I mean, they hate me. I mean, because I think anyone who actually reads Ray Blanchard's work and the work of Anne Lawrence and reads the supporting literature, the neurological studies that have been done, this sort of thing, they're going to come down and say, yeah, it's pretty much on the money. When a long time ago, when I started looking at this, which we don't need to go to the history, but it's certainly 15 years ago, I thought Blanchard was wrong, you know. I thought, no, I don't see this 2 types thing, because I just didn't. When I started coming to the Philippines, it immediately became obvious that I was wrong and he was right. Yeah, there are 2 distinct forms walking about all over the place, and you can tell just by looking at them which is which.
Is there not 2 forms of the female to masculine?
Well, clinically, in Blanchard, he says he has suggested that there might be a female equivalent for the autogynephilic form, that's the in love with yourself as a woman, non-homosexual form. But he says himself he doesn't think it exists. He said he only included this in his typology to avoid being accused of sexism, which didn't help, by the way. He still got accused of that.
So let me just formulate my thoughts first. So what was his rationale for not thinking?
Walking around the streets here, I don't see it. The trans men that I see are all walking around with women. They're all girls, and no, I don't see any of them dating guys. Not one. So no, which is what they would, that would be what you'd expect.
Yeah.
So that's a very superficial impression. I will agree with you, but no. And I do know a few people like that. I mean, they're not at all uncommon, and they're very open here. Nice thing about the Philippines is that most people speak pretty good English, so you can talk to them about it. And most of the trans men here are basically butch lesbians.
Fair enough. So butch they wanted a dick. Fair enough.
They can do the thing. Another thing here about the Philippines is that you don't need to go to a doctor to get hormones.
Yeah.
If you're MTF, you can literally walk into any pharmacy and just buy birth control pills that cost you, the cheapest ones I guess are about $1 for a strip. That's a US dollar for a strip. 21 pills.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah, you can just walk in. In the Philippines, you have to be over 18, but yeah, we've all got a big sister, So it's just easy. And even more unconventional medicines like injected estrogen and testosterone, there are loads of online sources that will just deliver them to your door the next day. So there is not that involvement. Now, I'm not saying that's something that I think is a good idea. I'm just telling you that's how it is here.
Yeah.
What might be a good idea, however, is that this arrangement avoids the involvement of medical professionals who are looking to make money from assisting people's transition, shall we say?
Yeah.
And I definitely think. Yeah, I don't think many real doctors are doing this, but it's clear to me that there are many so-called gender experts, gender specialists, and they're seeking to make a career out of transing people.
Yeah.
And that makes me really suspicious of them, Let's say I'm a journalist, and whenever I see money being involved like that, I'm going, what's this person's motives? What are your real motivations?
Typically, anytime there's money involved in pushing a certain idea, I'm always curious as to what the motivation behind it is, right? Because if you're pushing hormones on, 12-year-olds, it's like, well, why?
Yeah, and I don't know what these therapists in Canada and the United States are charging per hour, but I'm prepared to bet it's somewhere north of $100 an hour, something like that, USD. That's a lot of money.
Back when I was looking for couples counseling, I believe back when I was with my kid's mom, I think the cheapest I found was $180 an hour.
There you go. Right. Well, that's damn good living in anybody's book.
Oh,
let's be honest.
All you
need is an office and a desk.
Right? And a little chair the person can lay down on is right. So like that's really troubling, man.
Even if you're only working 10 or 15 hours a week, you're making good money,
Oh.
And that, what I mean? That's like, oh, well, I can see why you would
want to, right? And
I'm not accusing professionals of malpractice, but I am saying that there's probably
there's
probably
like,
and I think that when you have a political movement that is trying to stop any control and say, just trans as many kids as you can, I think it's a recipe for disaster. And I think I do believe that what we're going to see over a sort of 5-year timescale is cases coming to court where so-called support professionals find themselves being sued by people who had double mastectomies or, goodness gracious, even worse, whose bodies have been completely ruined.
Yeah.
And and the professional can be shown not to have applied due care and process, which they have a responsibility of care, you know.
Yeah.
And some of them are going. I think there's going to be litigation, and I think it's going to be messy, very messy. And one of my concerns is, because I am actually a supporter of the rights of trans people, is that this is going to flick back and hit, you know, that 10% of gender non-conforming kids who are actually HSTS trans, who just want to get on with life and be girls, you know, and they're going to be the ones who end up losing out as usual, you know, and that bothers me a bit, you know.
Well, it comes down to like the people that are who most need the understanding are going to be the worst affected by it.
Yeah. We very much risk throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and that's not going to help anything. That's, you know, I think that there is an imperative to stop the unnecessary transing of particularly young women, but boys also.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that we should make life more difficult for genuine trans people whose lives already are pretty difficult, you know, no matter how they come to be trans, the genuine classic forms of transsexualism. You know, an HSTS, if they can successfully pass as a woman, I know many who have very good lives. They're married women. They usually have adopted their husbands, married a divorced man, and he's got kids, so they become, you know, stepmothers, and they have good lives, you know, and nobody knows, absolutely nobody knows. For the late transitioning non-homosexual transsexuals, it's terrible, you know, because these are the people who go home to their wives one day and say, honey, I'm a woman. Yeah. And in many cases, they'll lose their job. Their wife would quite reasonably say, well, tough, because I'm not a lesbian. You know? and just say that you've been lying to me for years. She married a guy, and now you're what? He's going to lose contact with his children. He's going to lose career, his home. It's ruinous. It's absolutely ruinous. So these people really do need, you know, that society cuts them a little bit of slack. And I'm all for that. But I think we need to protect the kids.
Yeah, well, that's you can't be giving kids hormone blockers. Like, you have to. Waiting is not the worst thing.
No, absolutely not.
Putting a child through unnecessary surgery when they're more likely to detransition, to me, seems as if they are. Well, that seems morally wrong to me. That's just.
I think it is morally wrong. Yeah. I think it's reprehensible. And if people are doing this for money, I think that makes it even worse.
Yeah, you know? Well, it seems to me that there's a level of profiteering off of the social currency that is transgenderism or transsexuality.
The science usually talks about transsexualism because transgender isn't really a scientific term. It's too broad, you know. It's ill-defined.
Okay, no, that's fair. Transsexuality, that's good to know. Why don't we take this to the chat, and we'll see if there's any questions that they would like to ask. I guess the first one is, I've seen a couple people who showed up a little late. They'd like to know a little bit about your backstory.
Oh, right, me. I am a journalist. I trained as a photographer, moved into journalism, did a postgraduate training in writing, so started doing that also. Worked as a freelance journalist for many, many years. Was married, got divorced or separated in 2010. My kids, I have 4 kids, they're all grown up. I started getting involved and interested in this seriously, I guess, around about between 2003 and 2005. And I just started to read. You know, that's what I do. You know, if we're all the same, journalists are all the same. A subject comes up that's interesting, you read everything about it. And I discovered a book early on called Travesti by Professor Don Kulik. I can't remember what this university is, which was an anthropological investigation of the lives of Brazilian transsexuals, you know. And it was one of the very first books published on this. It was published around about 1995. And it was very interesting, and it gave you an insight into people's lives. It's a good book, well worth reading. And so from there on, I started to actually talk to and interview trans women in South America and Latin America. And I got to know a few quite well. Online, we had Skype in those days. That was all we had. I even learned enough Spanish to make some kind of sense. Brazilians speak Portuguese, but they usually understand Spanish. I couldn't find it in a Portuguese teacher. And then I wrote a book called The Warm Pink Jelly Express Train, which was published a long time ago now, but it might be of interest to people interested in this area. And then I started coming to the Philippines around about 6-7 years ago. I come every year. I come for many months, and partly it was because I find the European winters way too cold for me now. I have poor circulation, and I can't be asked with it. But also, you come to a place where suddenly you see there's trans women everywhere here. I mean, they are just everywhere. And so if you're already interested, then, you start to take more of an interest. And I ended up dating trans women, and I have a very charming, delightful trans girlfriend that drives me crazy, but I love her a bit. She's wonderful. Real sweet person. Oh. And she's busy next door with the cat. That's my background.
Okay. Well, Bad News Bear, I guess you just answered it, was asking if you married the transgender person knowingly, but sounds like you did.
Oh, yes. I've never been under any illusions when I dated a trans person. I knew they were trans. I suppose that leads to the question of what does that make me think about myself? And the answer is, I don't know. I am scientifically described as gynandromorphophilic, which means I find trans women attractive.
Fair enough.
And I can tell you that in terms of a relationship, there is absolutely no difference between having a relationship with, if you like, a real woman and a trans woman. You have fun together, you have fights together, you have a life together. It's just, there's no difference. Yeah. It's not weird.
Brian would like to know what effect has stopping sexual assignment at birth had on the trans population?
Sexual reassignment.
So, there's a new trend going on where when a child is born, they won't assign a gender.
Oh, I see. Well, I think that's part of the problem, actually. I think that one of the issues that's causing an uptick in reported cases of transsexuals and transgender in young people is that this idea that gender doesn't matter and it doesn't exist. And I think what that does is it removes the guidelines that young people grow up understanding, because, you grow up being a boy, and you learn to play football and, that kind of stuff. That doesn't stop you being interested in girly things or having girl friends. I lived in the country, so there were girls and boys together, but at least, you have that kind of, this is my line in life. And I think there is a political movement to try and destroy gender. Well, gender is innate. It's not a socialized thing. And that was made very clear to me when I lived in Volante, the very, very traditional rural village here. The gender evolved to provide a safe environment in which children can be raised, right? And it's been very, very successful for humans. And you don't go mucking around with evolution. Yeah. Otherwise, you get your fingers burned, and that's what's happening. We're having our fingers burned.
Well, yeah, it seems like it would be an issue, for sure, because there's that, like you said, there's that kind of gives you definitions of the polar opposites at the very least.
I'm not suggesting that men should be running around beating their chests and doing that sort of thing, and I'm not suggesting that women should be in the kitchen and that sort of thing. What I'm saying is that they should know who they are.
Yeah.
And I think when you take away people's framework for knowing what they are, which is based in gender, then you end up with a lot of very confused people. And here we seem to be reaping the results of that.
Okay. Jolly Roger Bear is asking, why has the trans issue only come about in developed countries?
Because, well, I can speak directly from the experience of the Philippines, which I believe is an undeveloped country. You might call it a third world country if you like. The reason is that the social structure here permits trans people to have a social space in which they can live and be themselves without without conflicting with the mainstream society at all.
Okay.
I mean, there's yeah, fair enough. You know, this is a Catholic country, and it's a very Catholic country. And yes, you will meet some older Catholics who have that face on when they see a trans woman. But 90%, 95% of people, they really just don't care. I mean, there are so many trans women here. Everybody has a trans woman in their family or a trans guy, you know? So,
Yeah.
you know, if your sister's a trans woman, you can hardly be abusive to the ones you meet in the street. You know what I mean?
That is a good point.
An issue. It stops being an issue, you know, when they're everywhere. And trans women here, you know, Filipinos generally and Southeast Asians generally are very good at self-mockery. You know, they kind of deflate themselves all the time, and they can be very, very funny people because of that. But because they have a sense of humor about what they are, then it makes them much less threatening. You know, when you're confronted by somebody being really strident, like say Paris Lee's or dare I say Caitlyn Jenner, then the reaction is like, you know, it's intimidating. But here, they crack jokes about themselves, and you know, they do daft stuff and you just go, oh yeah, right, okay, and it stops it being a threat, you know, so that they just get left alone and get on with it.
That makes.
I think that's a big benefit.
That would actually make sense. There's a comedian that a lot of my viewers and I watch on the regular, Owen Benjamin. He says that mocking each other is how we connect and how we bridge those differences.
I completely agree with that. I think that's absolutely right. And self-mockery, you know, it's a big thing. And people I think there's a tendency to forget about that. You know, it is quite an important thing.
Okay. I'm just trying to see if there's any more questions. It doesn't look like it. I think if there's one. Bad News Bears would like to know if the rise of Islam in the Philippines has affected how they handle transsexuals, but it sounds like it hasn't.
Well, I think that just we're going to clearly move the discussion slightly a little bit. To start with, there is no rise of Islam in the Philippines. The population is more or less stable and has been for centuries as a proportion of the overall Philippine population. Well over 95% of Filipinos are Christian, and most of those are Catholic. Islam is restricted to areas of the large southern island called Davao, and there are communities elsewhere, but they're very, very small.
Yeah.
The second thing to say is these people practice a form of Islam that's known as straight Islam, which is also found in places like Indonesia. And this is a very gentle form of Islam. Now, I agree that she's obviously being referring to the news from last year when there was real big trouble in Mindanao. So it's Mindanao, it's the island, not Davao. Mindanao, in Marami, the city of Marami, which was basically leveled. I mean, it's a terrible state. But these were a small group who were radicalized by basically ISIS cadres who were paid for by Saudi Arabia, right? Okay. The indigenous form of Islam is pretty tolerant here. And the other thing to remember is, and this is often not understood in the West, is that Islam is actually quite open to transsexualism, right? Now, there are some forms of Islam that really aren't, but you must be aware that Iran is one of the sex change capitals of the world.
I was not.
Because you're not allowed. See, this is what happens. You're not allowed to be a homosexual man in Iran, but you can be a transsexual woman, and the government will even pay for your sex change. This is true. So they carry a huge number.
Off the building if you're gay, but if you love it, you're good.
Proof of it, but I'm just saying that within Islam there is this understanding. In India, there is a very large population of trans women who are priestesses, most of whom self-castrate, by the way. Interesting. Yeah, exactly. They get into like a hypnotic trance with dancing and singing. They tie a tight cord around the whole package, and then with one shot with a knife, and it's off. I'm serious. I'm serious. And they're called hijra. Now, in the north of India, anyway, they're called hijra. They have other names in the south. Hijra is an Islamic name. It's an Arabic name, right? And the tradition of castration of trans women is practically unknown in the Hindu parts of India, but it's common in the formerly Muslim parts of India and Pakistan. So Islam is not as monolithic as it might at first appear. It's actually a very varied religion with many different views, and within it there are forms of Islam which are quite tolerant of transsexualism. So I would say that in the Philippines it doesn't really make any difference. Okay. Sorry, it's a long way of saying it doesn't really make much difference here.
I think fair enough. Jeez, that made me tense up a bit. Wow. That's.
I mean, you get trans women in places like Turkey's full of them. Syria, there's Egypt, loads of trans women. So the fact that the country is that an area is exclusively Muslim would not stop it having a population of transgenders.
That makes sense.
I think that possibly in some parts of the Islamic world, because, and this is true of most traditional societies, because women are not really accessible.
Okay.
You just can't have a girlfriend, and it means that men might turn to trans women, for sex, basically.
So it's like plan B for a lot of them.
You can't really, unless you're going to marry the girl, I mean, they really do have shotgun weddings. I mean, seriously, shotguns. AK-47 type shotguns, for people who get the wrong girl knocked up. So, there is a pressure to, if you're a young man and you want sex, there's a pressure to have it another way.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Interesting. I don't really know where to go with that.
It's a sideline, but yeah, I think that all I'm saying is that Islam is not. I mean, I think there are a lot of problems with the radical forms of Islam, but it's not by no means a monolithic, one size fits all.
Yeah.
And really the differences between different schools of Islam are certainly. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the differences between the most liberal and extremist forms of Christianity. I mean, you get like Anglicans who are very like Anglicans. Well, we don't care what you are. You can be just a very open. God loves us all. And then you maybe get Southern Baptist and fundamentalists who are extremely literalist, and they, it's a totally different thing. And you get the same kind of variation in Islam. It's not
fair enough.
Wrong.
I actually don't know all that much about Islam. I know I've obviously heard some of the more worrying aspects of it.
Some aspects are extremely worrying, yes. But it would be unfair to categorize all Muslims as believing in those aspects of it.
That's also fair. I don't like to paint with a broad brush. Okay, well, I think I'm gonna leave it there. Jolly Roger.
Sure, yeah.
Jolly Roger wants to ask if there is really a Bali High Island. I don't know.
Bali's in India. It's a holiday resort island in Indonesia, and it's full of trans women. Yes, if you want to meet a trans woman, you can easily meet them there. And then just to let you know, Indonesia has multiple religions. Bali is not a Muslim part of Indonesia, and it's a fairly relaxed, open place. I don't know if you remember, but a few years ago, oh gosh, it might be more than a few years ago now, there was a really nasty bombing of a nightclub in Bali, and that was carried out by Islamic fundamentalists from other parts of Indonesia, who resent the lifestyle on show in Bali.
They're just
Bali is.
And I guess the last one is by Democracy Bear. He's asking if you have spoken about the rise of transgenderism in conjunction with the falling of empires. I think this was something that Camille Paglia has made note of.
Ah, right, okay, the fall of empire. Well, the rise of transgenderism having to do with the fall of empires. What an interesting question and a difficult one to answer. From the point of view of here in the Philippines, I don't think so. You know, the Philippines got its independence from the United States in 1946. From it was formerly a Spanish colony until 1898, I believe. But the local, there are very few records are kept, written records, but it's quite clear that transgenderism has been a big part of the life here for many, 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 many years. We don't really know how many. But I don't think that the overall nature of being colonized has that much to do with it. But he's maybe meaning something like, does he think that the former colonizing nations, the imperial nations, have kind of lost their identity a little bit? And maybe they have, but I'm not entirely sure that's a bad thing, you know.
If I remember correctly, I think I remember the interview that he's talking about. It had to do more with the rise of transgender like mania. I think that might not be the right terminology.
Well, in India?
No, like mania, more like kind of like how we have going on in the West right now of like transgenderism being like this big political movement. So I could be way off about this and very misquoting her, but
to be honest with you, Kyle, that's not. It's an interesting question, but it's not one that I've actually done any research into or spent a lot of time thinking about. So I'm kind of like, I don't really know the answer to that. It seems to me a little bit of a stretch to think that I think that there are broad movements in society generally, many of which have to do with end of empire, you know, and the change of the relative status, nature of the status between nations. I'm not really convinced that they have anything to do with the prevalence of transsexualism, the classic forms at least. The classic forms of transsexualism, we're not talking about the ROGD form here, that is social, but the classic forms be innate, and if they're innate, they should appear roughly the same rates everywhere in the human populations.
Okay.
And that's actually pretty much what we see. You know, that's pretty much what we see. You're seeing the West at the moment, as I said earlier, with social intolerance reducing. I think it's coming into line with what we see here in the Philippines and in other parts of Southeast Asia, where there are a lot of trans people.
Yeah.
Just going about life and doing their thing, you know, and you really can't go to a supermarket or down the street here without meeting trans women. It's not doable, you know. Okay. So yeah, I think that so the broader social changes do have an influence, and they will influence how things shape up in the West, and to an extent, end of empire for everybody, including America, which was an imperialist nation. I know they don't like to admit it, but they were. And all post-imperial nations have that kind of self-questioning. You know, I mean, what are we for? If we can't conquer the world anymore, what are we doing? And so you get that period of introspection where people are trying to figure out what their society is all about and things like that. And I think, to be honest with you, that where this is happening in conjunction with a diminution, a fall in religiosity, in religion, I think people really do have some difficult questions that they have to ask about who they are. You know, because that's how that's how I grew up at a time in the 1960s when that's how you got your identity, was from the nation that you were part of and the religion that you were part of.
Yeah,
you know, and when you take both of these away, it's like, who am I and what am I? And yeah, again, that could be feeding back into the social media thing where kids are going, who am I? What am I? You know? Yeah. And they're being told wrongly, I believe, that, oh, you're trans, you know? Well, some people are trans, they really are trans, but it's not just a choice. It's not just something you go, I think I'll just be trans today.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like that. I mean, you meet trans people and you know that how committed they are, how they are. You know, a trans woman, HSTS trans woman particularly, you know, it's not, it's in every way she's like a woman. You know, she behaves like a woman. Her desires are like women's desires. She, you know, she does daft things and you know, you have all the things that you would expect to happen with a woman, they happen with a trans woman, you know.
Yeah.
It's really that deep, you know, it's not an act. But HSTS, anyway, it's not an act. And even for the other type, the non-homosexual ones, it's not really an act for them, although it's the second character. But
it's almost,
that,
it sounds to me kind of like a delusion where like they genuinely believe this about themselves, even if it's not the actual truth.
Speaking from the point of view of a man, and I've had relationships with both HSTS and AGPs. The difficulty with AGPs, the non-homosexual type, is that they are having a relationship with you by proxy. You know, it's not really it's not the original person that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the signal's fuzzy sometimes, very fuzzy. With an HSTS now, it's just like it's you relate to an HSTS trans woman exactly the same way as you do to a woman. They are what they are, you know.
Yeah.
They're naturally feminized in a whole range of parameters, and their sexuality is one of them. Which points to it being innate. I mean, I can't see how it could be anything other than innate. It's,
all right.
My girlfriend has woken up, and I hear her chattering in the background.
All right. Well, I will let you go enjoy your company. And
okay, well, thank you for the opportunity, and
thank you very much.
Yeah, please visit my site. Watch my YouTube. You know my YouTube channel, Rod Fleming's World. Have a look at it. There's lots of videos up there about transsexualism and transgenderism, and I put up one yesterday that discusses rapid onset and some of the things we've been talking about today. So, you know, that might be of interest to your viewers also.
Cool. Yeah, no, I will be sure to check it out, and everyone who's watching, please do so as well.
Okay, and if anybody wants me to do a video on a particular area, you know, you can contact me through Twitter or via my website or my channel, and I will research it and do it. I'm always looking for ideas. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Have a nice Friday night or Thursday night there. Okay. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.